Gayle Gliva-McConvey, thanks so much for joining us. And as I explained, the narrative medicine is going through a similar process of trying to figure out what are the standards of best practice in our field. It's been around for about 25 years. The field is growing. More people are involved. Some people are starting narrative medicine programs without any formal training. Um, so I was really interested in how the Association for Standardized Patients started their standards of practice movement. And according to Kathy Smith, you were really instrumental in getting the working groups together. How did you, what, first, I guess the question is, what made you want to develop the standards of practice for ASPE? What was the impetus behind your involvement in that?
So I'm going to give you a little bit of a history lesson because, the methodology itself started with Howard in '64. I mean, and at that time, it was an innovative teaching tool, and he used the word tool. So it was something new in education and to develop his clinical skills, as you know. So in '64, he started it. In '69, he went to McMaster medical in Hamilton, Ontario. And I met him in '73. So as he's training trainers, I started as an SP and then of course then became his trainer and then became the director of the program there. As he's training trainers, we're developing the methodology as we kind of go along, because there's nobody to say, here's how you do it right, here's how you do it wrong, here's the things you need to think about. So as we were developing a sort of a more of a standardized training, because at that time it was just a few of us, and we did it sort of, as you said earlier, no training, because there was no one to train us except for Howard. And he was a really good trainer in that he let us developing our own style of training. So everybody who sort of came to workshops and we would train them how to train the SP, then they would take that away and develop it using their own styles, their own techniques, and developing it through there. So as we grew as a group, we started meeting at the AAMC, like people, getting like people. Fast forward, when we looked at how many people were actually training SPs and working with them, we felt that we needed to have some sort of common ground and not develop it new every time, every program developing something new, when in fact it was already in existence and we could easily share things. So when we decided to develop an association, the founding board members, I was one of them, and I was chair of standards of practice. So in 2001, the board sort of developed and we started thinking about standards. All of us on the board very excited because now there's so many of us who have developed our own sort of techniques, and it would be really nice to have some sort of common ground and standards to meet. So a few of us got together on the board, as well as pulling in people who, from my perspective, have been doing the, training for a long, long time, and a long, long time could already be 15 years. We sat and we started developing our standards. So in my note to you, it was an interesting rollout because at one of the early conferences, we were so excited to roll out our standards of best practices that met with a lot of controversy, a lot of, well, I don't do that way, and who are you to say I should do it that way? Internationally, we had a few people in the audience and they were, well, how come you don't have anybody internationally represented on your committee? So it became it wasn't an ownership thing, because we were, for the board of ASPE, developing it for ASPE, but it certainly met with a lot of resistance because, again, while it was at the time, what, 69 to 2000, an older, what we thought was an established methodology, it really wasn't. There were too many people who felt that they did it and their institutions did it differently. And while we were trying to say this is sort of guidelines and not a, you have to do it this way, it wasn't anything like accreditation or anything like this. These are guidelines, and we were welcoming input to continue to develop these guidelines. Well, it was met with such resistance in that time that we kind of pulled back and decided that we would work more on developing the methodology itself and not the standards of it, if that makes any sense.
Right. Yeah, if there's
Trying,
no agreement, if there's no agreement on the methodology,
right,
then it's hard to develop standards.
exactly. So rather than standards, let's develop training, let's develop things to help people develop those skills. And we work closely with the educational committee and trying to look at how do we roll out things that people wanted more training. And it's interesting, Tony, because one of the things that I've done is I have saved all the programs from ASPE and from the conferences. And I looked at them a few years ago when I started looking at the first one, which was we attached ourselves to the Ottawa conference in Ottawa. They gave us the first day of it, so that people who were going to the Ottawa conference anyway could sort of add a day and then come to the ASPE conference. So we had that one day attached to Ottawa, and the topics are really interesting. It was more like how to train physical exam findings, how to, introduce feedback. It was very fundamental in our topics, which of course that's how we would have expected it. But those types of things are what standards of the committee started looking at, is let's develop, sort of these kind of things to roll out to our members. Fast forward to 2013, as I was leaving the presidency, I think now it's time. I think now we can actually, we've had 20 some odd years as an association. We have, a large contingency of people and expertise on the board that from many, many years of experience and multiple backgrounds, we can start pulling in people and start looking at the standards. And so that was our first working committee. And as you noticed in the email I sent you, most of them were chairs of on the ASPE board, because we wanted to make sure that we represented the group itself, but also under the umbrella of ASPE, and anything we wrote would be supported by ASPE. And I had invited a couple of international representatives, but unfortunately they couldn't come to the 4-day meeting that we had. And we did try to Zoom them in, but you're looking at 2013 before COVID, and Zoom was not as well established as it was now. So they decided that it would be better for them to be reviewers of it rather than developers of it and designers of it. And again, I had representation from the research committee, because we wanted to base anything that we did on research. And Kate and Nancy were just brilliant researchers, so they pulled that aspect in. And past presidents with Tamara, her experience in developing and designing groups, and being on the board and working with a variety of schools that she started programs from scratch. So, I pulled in a lot of these people and had to cap it. There were more people I would have loved to pull in, but as you know, the larger the group gets, the more chefs there are in the kitchen. And as it was a very good working group, but with very passionate perspectives. And so that's when the passion, we would fall back on the research part of it. Well, let's look at this. Is there any scientific part here we can look at and sort of calm the passionate perspectives of it? Is this helpful?
No, it's extremely helpful because the field had been around for quite some time, for a few decades.
Yeah, yeah,
And suddenly, there was no at that time there was no central place out of which this sprung. You know,
right,
Howard Bowers started in USC, moved to McMaster's,
right.
and it sounded a little bit more freewheeling in the beginning.
Oh, it was. It absolutely was. And
Yeah.
I think that was the positive thing about Howard and his teaching style, is because he wanted you to internalize it and not mimic anything. But that also created well, I don't do it that way. Well, our institution doesn't do it that way. Well, we do it this way. And even now, I mean, with the standards of best practices, these are guidelines. No one's going to come back and mark you down because you don't do it this way. But I think it gives people more of a power to say, well, here's how it's done from ASPE. Now we can take it and run from there. And that's one of our goals. One of the things that I do caution is if anything you do is seen under the umbrella of one institution, that I think you're going to have some, well, that's how they do it. That's not how we do it. That's why I think ASPE was so nice in spreading it out, and no institution, no organization, only the association was the one that kind of owns it, if that makes any sense.
No, it
Uh,
makes complete sense because the association itself, and I remember I used to go to the special interest groups at AAMC. I think I was the last presentation of the last special interest group at AAMC
oh, is
before.
that right, Tony? That is so funny.
Yeah, I think I presented on the metrics, developing the metrics of your program, what's a good program.
Yeah.
Uh, and did it with overhead slides. You remember how you developed
Oh,
these?
yeah.
It was really crude. Uh, but so the association itself started as a special interest group, and then became this international association that continues to grow.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so the
Yeah.
association itself has if I could say, foundation in multiple institutions
Yeah.
internationally, not just in one place. Even though it
Right.
may have started at USC, moved to McMaster.
Yeah.
You were the first lay standardized patient, I believe.
Lay
Um,
standards patient educator. Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
Standardized patient educator. Yeah, yeah.
The and I think one of the things do you remember at AAMC, we had to announce that they were disbanding the special interest group.
Right.
And that's what triggered us to say, wait a second, we all, look how much it was a standing room only. I mean, you had a standing room only because I helped develop the SIG. It was a standing room only attendance. And, when we asked them, well, why are you disbanding us? They said, well, because SPs are starting to be integrated throughout the whole AANC program. There were multiple people presenting about it. And so we've done our job. We've, special interest group has now expanded out to be more foundational with AAMC and doesn't need to be special anymore. So that was a kick in the pants to say we all benefit so much from this, and we need to have an association. That's when it all started to develop.
Yeah, I didn't
Um,
realize that. The impetus was you have to move on.
yes, exactly. We move on, or we just again float around in our own little universes, and again developing things that maybe somebody else has done already, and even better than what you could do. So, yeah, so that's sort of we were, and besides meeting people that we adore, it was a matter of if we don't do it, we're going to just again float around and meet maybe at different conferences that we all go to. So that was the kick in the pants.
How
It
did
was
you?
a good thing and a bad thing. I mean, we were all like, what? And then we're like, yeah, we better do
You got to do this. Yeah. So I wasn't involved in the development of ASPE, even though I've been to 90% of the conferences. Can you tell me how did you make that transition from SIG to ASPE? What were the steps involved in that? Because I remember the first conference was at Eastern Virginia, right? It was in
Yeah, that was the first standalone. Again, the first sort
that
of
was the first
official
standalone
conference was at
conference.
the Ottawa. Yeah, but the first standalone was here in Virginia Beach. Um, but that was the first ASPE conference. But there were three other sort of after AAMC SIG, we started getting together and say, well, we still need to continue. So there was one in Calgary that again, open invitation now, but now it's not attached to anything, and people had to sort of convince their institutions that this was a good thing. There was one in Galveston with, Delia, as you probably remember Delia.
Mhm.
And there was another one in,
New Orleans. There was there was a
yes,
lag
in New Orleans,
lag.
a
I think it
standalone.
was,
Len,
yeah,
yeah,
yep.
that's right. Thank you.
Something extra. I think that's what it meant. I was at that one. Yeah, I wasn't at the other two.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And then that's so it was almost a proof of concept, those three conferences. Do we, can we, can we attract enough people to think that this is a good thing? Are we able to put these things on? And, should we? And then the answer was yes, because there were people and the attendance grew and grew each time. So that's when a few of us sat down and again said we need to make this more formal and official, and that's when we did that. And we had a few, in Niagara on the Lake, we had a couple of, and in Toronto we had a couple of conferences from a group of us to say, okay, how are we going to do this? And that's when it finally came together.
So there was a few year gap between the AAMC SIG ending and then the development of ASPE. So
Yeah,
there were meetings, and
yeah,
I suppose they were attended by a lot of the same people. These were the people that were really uh, deeply serious about
yeah,
developing this, and they
yeah,
became I guess
yeah.
the basis
Yeah,
for ASPE.
absolutely, absolutely. And I don't know if you heard my speech at ASPE this year, but Howard was very surprised when we said we want to have an association. He was like, "Well, do you think there are going to be enough people interested?" And he's as humble as he was. He never thought that there would be something more official in the now methodology, because we sort of transformed from just an educational tool to a methodology. And that's when we started to say, yeah, this is gonna be good. This is gonna be good. And we have been.
Yeah, how many members of ASPE? About 900? Is that what? Do you know what the
Yeah,
number is?
just under 1,000 now, from what I understand, internationally.
And how
And
many
that's
practitioners in the field? Do you have a sense of that as well?
I, I don't have any sense of that. But I think it's a real pat on the back when we have a thousand official members, just under 1,000 official members, and 600 of them come to ASPE. That ratio probably is not even close to any other association who have conferences. So I think that just promotes our interest and our passion and our activity in the methodology. And then of course, some people just can't because they're not being supported by anybody. So that's a shame. Um, but yeah, I think that says something about us as educators
Mhm.
in what we do.
Yeah, I think for me, one of the major strengths of ASPE is it gives a forum for standardized patient educators to actually educate about the field,
Yeah.
about what they're doing individually, and so they're still learning from each other,
Mhm.
and So that's always been an exciting part for me of seeing people presenting their work, um, networking, forming relationships, and so forth. I guess the one thing I was wondering if the methodology led to the standards. Do you see the methodology of SP work changing and therefore leading to changes of the standards? You know, it,
I think that's one of our strengths is, SP educators and practitioners are really, they understand the need for flexibility. And, when we talk about the standards of best practice, we do talk about these are guidelines. These are fluid. We are going to be updating them eventually. We are going to, as the methodology um, continues to grow and continues to be, um, and in the publications, the science of it continues to be developed. I think we need to say, yeah, we these standards, we might refine them a little bit more, or we might say this might be a little outdated. We need to reconsider that. And I think that something that in the next few years will be done again, and review the standards of best practices, because again, if we call it best practices, we don't want to be outdated practices. So we're looking at more current. I mean, even the fact that with COVID and all the technology that's been involved in it, when we did this in 20, what did I say, it was published in 2017, but we did it in 2014, even though we didn't have anything like the technology they have now. So we're gonna have to look at that. How does technology impact what we do as educators, and what the SPs do as their own field of education? So yes, it's always been that way. But I think that's because we have the membership, we get feedback from the membership. It's not directed from top down. It has always been directed from the field in looking at what is best for our methodology as practitioners. Because I think, again, that just that, somebody standing up there, which was me, saying, okay, let's talk about standards of best practices. And a lot of people are like, well, who are you to say what we have to do in best practices? And that's when we said the methodology is still too new. People are still in their own minds developing ways to do things, and it took another 14 years to actually start sitting down and doing that.
So it's fascinating that you say that. It's still too new. And the field has been around since when? 63? I think that's when.
64 was 63, 64. First publication Howard did was in 64, but obviously he was doing it before that. So
How many
uh,
years is that? About 60 years? Has it been that long?
oh yeah, oh yeah,
Yeah.
oh yeah,
Yeah, so
yeah,
that's pretty amazing then to admit, even after 60 years, we're still evolving. And I
yes,
completely agree that COVID kind of changed everything. It really, in many ways, provided an impetus. It moved this idea of computer-based practice, a full decade or more ahead. It really kind of forced the evolution of the field in ways that, perhaps were not thought of, pre-COVID.
yeah. And I think the our and I don't mean it to sound kind of negative. Our attitude of our SPs has refined itself. Again, teaching tool. Howard never treated people in a negative way, but in his mind, it was an educational tool. That's when a lot of the publications, we were using SPs, and now publications are changing our vernacular and saying we don't use SPs. You can't use people, but certainly that awareness also changes our methodology, and looking at how we even talk about, my and again, ownership, my SPs were always considered educators.
Mm-hmm.
And we made sure that that was what, with the feedback that they give and the input that they give for our students, they're educators. And it has to, I think, that perspective keeps getting modified. And you see that in some of the presentations at ASPE this year. It was interesting to look some of those things on how, the institutional recognition of SPs has become different than what it used to be.
How's it different now, do you think?
Well, I think a lot of institutions actually have job descriptions for SPs. When you're hired as an SP. Before, I mean, even at EVMS, when they were considered hourly transients. And even though I had people with me for 20 years, it took a while just to get HR to think about these aren't transients. These are, I hired them as educators, and they developed its own classification for, in the HR world. And I think that's again sort of how we has the methodology has progressed.
Mhm.
Because when you talk to people, even our own job descriptions, as you know, they're also starting to be more solidified through the work that we do with in the research area. And I mean, Lou Clark, our president, with some of the surveys that she's done, has made a good point about, let's talk about descriptions and job descriptions and titles and salaries and that sort of thing, which is another step for us.
One thing I really have appreciated as well is the allowing for a conversation that critiques the field. And I remember hearing, I guess it was at ASPE, Deborah Nestel, when she had talked about even the word standardized patient, how it was, it was really initially, I think, about a simulated patient and a standardized examination, and it was also perhaps North American focused, and so I've I really have appreciated the maturity of the field to allow critique of the field so that it could grow. Let's look at some things that are working, some things that aren't, including the methodology. Uh, Temple West's wonderful article on structural inequalities uh, of SP work.
Yeah.
I think really it really pointed to how the institutions still need to get up to speed with this work that's been around for so long. So I thought that was a really important article, by her. I have one more question for you about. I've always been I've had kind of a split mind about standards of practice, and my view, having gone through this 3 times in the family therapy field, ASPE, standardized patient field, and now narrative medicine. I always think that the standards conversation comes up in the field as kind of entering middle age.
I think
And
you're
so,
right.
yeah, yeah. And so I just wonder, do standards inhibit innovation? And again, I think you make it very clear that these are guidelines. These are not rules, but the fact that, just using the word standards of practice, does that sometimes, do you think, is there a danger of inhibiting the growth of the field, the innovation? Um, any thoughts about that?
Up until this point, I had not, because when we were developing them, we were trying to think of institutions or individuals that needed to have something to aspire to. And knowing our, not only our membership, but knowing the type of people that are attracted to being an SB educator. I think that creativity has always been one of the lines of our job description. And so I never felt that it was going to be restrictive. If anything, it would be another diving board off to more discussion. And if somebody says, well, I don't agree with this, that's even better. Well, let's talk about why you don't agree with it. And then we, come to open up that discussion. So I never thought of it as being restrictive. I thought of it, and then I'm gonna say something different. I also thought of it as something for people to be use it as defensive, because again, so many people don't understand what we do or what our SPs are capable of. To have something that states for our safety of our SPs, it allows our SP educators to say, if somebody is saying, well, we want you to do this, you say, well, no, by the standards, this really isn't something that's going to be helpful to anybody if you want them to do that. So restrictive and only more of a defensibility type of thing, that, it's not the wild, wild west. We do have some guidance and some rules that some of them should not be argued against, especially when it comes down to the safety of both our SPs and our learners. So does that answer your question? I never thought of it as being restrictive. I thought of it as more of a
Yeah.
defensive and let's make sure that somebody isn't being interviewed 29 times a day from a highly emotional simulation, which could possibly have done in the past.
No, I completely agree with what you're saying. I remember attending Nancy McNaughton's presentation years ago on the article that she had written on,
Yeah.
the issue of, the vulnerability of SPs that play psychologically complex cases. And at that time, I was really myself probably more of the Wild West, that didn't really look so much at the. I kind of over-relied on this idea that the people being standardized patients, simulated patients, were had a great deal of resilience. And I think I remember raising an objective in her workshop, and then afterwards, a couple of years later, I saw her at a conference and said, "I really changed my mind." What I
Yeah.
said, I don't think she remembered even what I said, but it really did make me start to think that this is important. You can't have people just working for 8 hours straight, which some people would do. There's something about thinking of SPs as actors that I think the schools have sometimes thought that they're less than, professional.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think sometimes actors are like the lowest rated, or get the least credibility of any profession. I think that's been around since Shakespeare's time, at least.
And
So,
I think sometimes the school gives the SPs too much credit in that, they will identify when they're starting to mentally be fatigued and, will speak out, which we know is sometimes true, but sometimes not true.
mm,
Sometimes, they're motivated to work all 8 hours because it's not only stimulating them, but financially good for them. And we sometimes have to, almost parent them and say, no, this is not good. You can't do this all day long. And so that's the guidelines are sort of there to get everyone to think about it. And if you come up with something different and you use that in your own institution, there's no penalty, but there is an awareness. And that's what I think that what standards want to sort of give, is an awareness of what you should be thinking about when you're putting together a program or when you're running a program. Think about these things. Don't just sort of think everything's going to work out well. Because, we avoid, ASPE is a history of stories. And one of the stories I always talk about with SP safety, one of the things that I had a rule in my own is they did not simulate something that they had experienced themselves. And I give the story of new in Virginia. We were so excited when the Rape Crisis Center contacted us and said, we think SPs would be perfect for this because we can't practice on real rape victims. Okay, I said, yes, I think it's great. So I called one of my best SPs and I said, I have a proposition for you. This is a new program. It's going to be so exciting. Please come in and, meet with them and let's talk about this. So this woman came in and two rape crises, two of us, and rape crisis counselors and two of us. And we started talking about it and talking about the role and what was going on. And I saw the woman sort of get more and more pale. And I said, just a second. So I pulled her out and I said, so you change color, what's going on? And she said, well, 18 years old, I was raped. And I said, but I'm fine. I can do this. I really think I would be very good at this. And I looked at her and I said, absolutely not. Just by the fact of us talking about it, the way you have lost color. I said, there's just no, oh no. She said, oh no, I really want to do it. I said, no, this is a policy that I've learned. We do not do this to you. It's like a scratch. We just keep rubbing it raw, raw, raw. And in fact, I let her go and I talked to and we got another person and we did great. But the problem was that I lost that SP. She finally decided that she didn't want to do this anymore. It was too emotionally draining. And I think it's because just that experience of talking about it to possibly be trained as a rape victim triggered so much with her. And so that reinforced I don't ever have anybody simulate something. And people say, well, they could draw from that experience. I'm going, yeah, but why do it? Why not be trained by something else and have a lot of fun? Why live your life again? Just doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah, being an SP is not the place
No.
to work out the things that have not been worked out in your life. It's
Right.
not a therapy program.
It's not therapy. It's not something, yeah. So, I mean, you get it, and I get it. And that's why in the standards of best practices, it talks a little bit about, try not to train into something that they've already experienced. And I mean, yeah, okay, so they broke their arm. You can do that. But I mean, anything that's more psychologically, and you never know what's psychologically triggered. So I stay away from a lot of that. But
Yeah.
I mean, and so a lot of our standards of best practices are developed from this narrative type of thing that we talk about it and say, what have we learned and what do we need to go from here?
Well, Gayle, thank you so much. I really appreciate first the work that you've done in the SP field, the development of ASPE, the development of standards of best practice, and I'm hoping our field of narrative medicine can learn something from you, and in particular about the idea of including as many voices in this, and then having a conversation, a discussion about this, because many of the features of narrative medicine have been done for a long time through medical humanities in dealing with narratives, dealing with stories. And I think one of the things I said that it's similar to what reminds me of narrative medicine and SP work is that on the surface it looks easy, but it does bring up some issues with you, especially in our field when we're looking at different texts and humanities. It brings up emotional issues that we maybe have been unresolved, and so it's both exciting and something to be aware of.
And I
So
think that's a good frame of mind to go into something like this,
yeah.
rather than blindly saying, oh, well, whatever we do, I think people love it. They'll love it. No, no. Oh dear.
Well, thank you so much, Gail. I
You're
really do
welcome. As
appreciate
always,
this.
I enjoy talking with you, Tony. It's always a pleasure of mine.
This is Tony Ericetti, the host of Mindworks in Conversation. We bring you insightful discussions with artists, writers, clinicians, and educators exploring the creative aspects of their work. To experience more of these inspiring conversations, join us at Narrative Mindworks.